Well, to get a bit more analysis on the U.S. presidential election, let's bring in Julie Norman, a lecturer at the UCL Centre for U.S. Politics. Thank you for joining us. What are your thoughts looking at this election day in the U.S.? Polls are showing Joe Biden with a lead. Polls, of course, have been wrong before. What do you think? Could Joe Biden beat Donald Trump?
Well, of course, that's the big question today. And Biden has held this lead for quite a while during this election period, which is different than it was in 2016, when even though Hillary Clinton also had a lead on election day, it was smaller than Biden's. It was about 4 or 5% compared to his 9 or 10%. And again, Biden has held that very solidly, which Biden supporters see as a very good sign. And it's also notable this year that, even though Biden and Trump are trying to swing those last few undecided voters, there's a smaller group of undecided voters this year than there was in 2016. Probably around 6 to 8%, again, about half the number that we saw in 2016. And it was that demographic that swung hard to Trump on that final day. So there are some key differences between this election and 2016 for sure. And we're seeing that play out already in terms of the turnout. Again, nearly 100 million Americans already voting just shows the enthusiasm, the passion, and the importance that Americans are placing on this election.
So what's behind that massive turnout? I mean, these are numbers we have never seen before. Is it anger against Donald Trump? Do people love Joe Biden that much?
Well, it's certainly a mix of things. We've seen consistently that Trump supporters are more enthusiastic about voting for Trump than Biden supporters are for voting for Biden. However, most Biden supporters who are planning to cast a vote for Biden are enthusiastic about voting against Trump. So a lot of this election has come down to a referendum on Trump as an individual, whether people either love him at this point or hate him at this point and really want to cast that ballot to make a decision on that. But also, I think it's because of the nature of this election being very heavily facilitated by mail-in voting and early voting, which of course are both procedures that were put in place even more so this year than in the past to accommodate the pandemic. And with those different kinds of voting options, we just do see a different level of turnout from people who may not have voted normally on election day, may not have actually physically gone to the polls for whatever reason, but are willing to cast a ballot by mail. So those two things in conjunction are really pushing up turnout this year for sure.
Julie, there was a study that came out recently saying something like most Americans hate the other political party more than they love their own political party. Would you say the incredibly divisive nature of this election is something that's uniquely American?
Well, we are indeed seeing a new level, but even a new kind of polarization in the United States. Not only differences on policies and ideas, but actually a sense of animosity and almost a sense of moral certitude in one's own side, and then projecting kind of an immorality on the other side. So we are seeing kind of a different level of that playing out, at least right now in America. And I don't think that's unique to American politics specifically at this moment. We've seen divisive politics, especially as more populist movements have taken root, not only in the US, but across Europe as well. And more of a narrative around an us and them, kind of a good people and bad people kind of narrative. But this isn't necessarily new to this time. It's not something that is something that we cannot overcome. I think it's at a particularly severe point right now. And depending on how this election turns out, that might sway the kind of narrative we see moving forward. If it's more one of unity reaching across the aisle, or more of one of animosity and digging into one's own side.
There is one thing that does seem uniquely American, and that's the role of the courts in this election. There's already some 300 lawsuits that are already filed in dozens of states. How likely is it, do you think, that we'll be looking at a very contested vote count?
Well, that's certainly one possibility. If either candidate has a big decisive win tonight, then we'll be able to not go into that kind of court counting. But if it's close, especially in some of the key battleground states, both sides are prepared for long legal battles. That includes what kinds of ballots are counted in terms of if voters made errors or not, in terms of how long after Election Day votes can be accepted. And so a number of court cases moving forward that might happen.
Julie, thanks so much for taking the time to speak to us. Julie Norman there, a lecturer at UCL Centre for U.S. Politics. Thank you. Now to